him.
No, girl, you saw a ghost.
Yeah. So his name was Reverend George Eastman. His house is called the Parsonage. The Parsonage alone, not even the whole island, is one of the top 5 haunted areas in Australia. Almost every single person that I read reviews from these tours experienced something with or without other people in the room. The tour guides sometimes will make the ghost tour a little bit more fun and do the bang on the wall, just like a campfire story when you're telling the really serious part and everyone's really interested in it.
Yeah.
And then someone makes a real loud noise. It's just to kind of enhance the fun. In the parsonage, almost everyone gets a picture of at least an orb, has an experience there, or sees one of 2 very specific entities in this house.
Okay.
And all of them have the same description without knowing most of the information about this place.
Which is amazing.
So Reverend George Eastman lived in a house that was originally part of the prison. He did kind of go back and forth. I saw a report that he went to Melbourne to be with his family and to take care of some business, and then would travel back without his family, and then his family would follow.
Yeah.
There's a shadow almost always viewed from the parsonage, and a lot of people have said that when they're in other buildings that overlook, or when they're walking in different areas that will look upon the parsonage, when they look, they'll see a figure that's indicating for them to come back to the parsonage.
No.
Especially children.
No, that is a hard no.
A writer, George Grunsell, had written the story of the parsonage and when the Reverend had lived there, when he left his wife and 10 children.
Damn.
To follow him later because he had to go back to the island on business. He was at the house with a servant just by themselves. Another person that was on the island had assumed his whole family was home because he saw flickering lights and shadows moving across the top half of the house. When he had approached, he walked in through the front door and had only found the Reverend and his single servant sitting in one room where there was one light. And when asked about his family, he was like, no, they're still on the other island.
Yeah. This house was haunted even before.
Yeah,
oh my
actually,
gosh.
the hauntings and the experiences go back about 140 years.
I have really good goosebumps. They're like triumphant, victorious goosebumps, the best kind.
No one was upstairs. There was no actual light upstairs at all. It was complete darkness. The only room that was lit was the room that the servant and the Reverend were currently in.
They were ghost lights and ghost shadows.
The Reverend and his wife were sitting in one room and had seen a light turn on in another room. When they looked through the keyhole and found it very well lit on the other side, they opened the door to figure out where the light was coming from and noticed that it was completely dark on the other side of the door when it was open. When they were recounting this later to Judge Fleming, a friend of theirs that was staying over, the judge did not believe that this was happening.
Oh my God.
And didn't believe that it ever happened. But the exact same night this same occurrence happened, they all peered through the keyhole to see a very well-lit room on the other side, opened it to complete darkness. A lady guest had heard unexplained knocking from the walls and the floors, and she fled upstairs in the house. When she did so, upon her run up the stairs, she heard the patter of feet following her and felt the presence of something following her up the stairs. A servant was once sent to check the fire in a guest room of the house. When they heard her shriek, they came in. They had seen that she had collapsed. She said that there was a man looking into the window with a knife or dagger held to strike.
No!
She refused to go back in that room ever when it was dark. The mother of one of the people that was living in the house felt one night that she couldn't sleep. She saw a figure that was draped in white enter while she was still awake and looked like they had struck a match. They had walked over to a child that was currently sleeping in a cot, stood over the child, and then silently, quote, glided out of the room. This is when people were still living there. She heard no footsteps. There are temperature drops all over the entire island. Sometimes the curtains in the parsonage house will billow when no one is in there, and banging noises are often heard whether or not anyone is anywhere near that area. FYI, later on, it became a post office, and now it's been reverted to a living space, so people actually have lived in that space since. The Reverend, good old George, he owned the parsonage house. He was known as a very imposing man because he was, quote, tall and terrifying, and he preached in the manner of fire and brimstone and was pretty not cool with any delineation from his particular faith.
I mean, he sounds terrifying.
When he died and unfortunately left his 10 children and wife, the government stopped paying for them to be living there because he was no longer in service of the government. They had a stressful life after
Yeah,
he
so
had
they
passed.
literally were left with almost nothing.
Right. The thing about him being crazy tall and very big is that when he did die, and he did die in that house, they realized that putting him in his coffin was way too hard to get the coffin out of the house. Apparently, it's a very small house.
Old-timey on an island small.
Yeah. So in order to get the coffin out of the house, they tried to lower it through the second floor window.
Yeah, I figured as much.
Unfortunately,
Didn't work out.
the rope snapped and his body came rolling out of the broken coffin.
Oh, no. Georgie.
People hear door closing. People smell rotting flesh. They hear moans and then obviously see figures. In addition to seeing the imposing figure of possibly the Reverend, the Lady Blue, a lot of people see her as a teenager that appears near the account house and the parsonage, mostly in the parsonage. They think that she was one of the accountant's wives who had died in childbirth. She is seen by the accountant's house, but a lot of times in the parsonage. And this is something, too, that a lot of people feel the presence of her, specifically in the parsonage. We talked a little bit about this earlier. It's mostly children. And the reason that that is so important to her general character is because sometimes she's seen weeping. They think that the reason the lady in blue may be still haunting the area is because she's still searching for her child, because in this time period and because of the church presence on the island, when she had died during childbirth and she was baptized, they buried the two bodies separately. So she was buried on consecrated ground, and because the child wasn't able to be baptized, the child was buried on unconsecrated ground. Sometimes they see her as wearing a crinoline dress and bonnet. A lot of times her arms are outstretched. Sometimes she's seen in a pale dress that goes all the way from her waist to the ground. And then most of the time she's looking outside of the back door of a building. They see her weeping, calling out for children. There were a couple times that I saw relayed on different forums. One time it was a daughter that had tried to get out of her mother's area and went running. The other time that's pretty well known apparently was that a little boy was struggling against his mother and asked her to set him down. She set him down. He ran towards the veranda with his arms up to be picked up like kids do.
I know. I pictured that when you said his arms were up.
And when his mother asked him what he was doing, he said, quote, "The nice lady who lives here wants to play."
Oh,
I know, it's so sweet.
Sweet baby.
Speaking of the veranda, one of the people had said while they were on the tour that they heard when they were in another room in the parsonage, but it was close to the veranda. They heard footsteps and the creaking boards and had seen that there was a shadow, but when they looked out the window to actually view what might have been there, there were no actual floorboards because they were currently in the middle of restoration of said veranda.
Oh, that's crazy.
It's amazing.
Wow.
Okay. A builder that was involved in the restoration awoke to a heavy weight on his chest and the sensation of hands gripping and strangling him.
No, you keep your hands off of me.
His two colleagues who were staying in the same area had heard and seen him convulsing and rocking back and forth. When they went to drag him out of the house, they couldn't move him until what they feel was the ghost let up. The first reported spirit that people saw was before they had a solitary prisoner tending to the island. It mentions a team, so there was one of the higher officers as well as two prisoners that were gravediggers. They went to dig a grave for someone who was going to be executed the next day, and while they were doing so, they looked up knowing that they were the only 3 people on the island to see a man standing on the cliff of the island.
Jeez.
Yes, super neat. Going back to the surgeon's house, people see a female dressed in white walking from the stables or where the stables used to be. People often get pinched. Sometimes, and this is according to a few different Yelp reviews of the tour, people have gone back to their hotel room to find that the area that they felt being pinched or repeatedly pinched in some cases in the surgeon's house actually left a red mark on their body like someone pinched them.
Oh, wow.
Especially when no one was around them to do so. There is a powder magazine and a guard tower where people often hear moans, and uniformed spirits are seen wandering through the passageways, one of which who walks through the hall and sometimes grabs arms. In addition to the moans, people hear shouting. Behind the guard tower, there is a cottage that a lot of times there is a very specific soldier in a red uniform that wanders through there or can be seen from other areas on the island if you're looking over that cottage. 1840, 20-year-old Private Robert Young was escorting a doctor to tend to an injury that was on the island. So he was escorting him back to his house essentially, but as that was also working as a medical area for officers, he was going to tend to someone. The private decided that he was going to stay in the boat, but unfortunately he had lost his footing, and despite efforts from 2 convicts that were really close to the shoreline to save him, he unfortunately drowned.
Oh, wow.
His ghost haunts the jetty, and guests that are staying at the cottage that's close to the jetty have noticed him standing, looking over the water where his body was said to have been lost.
Aww.
Every single one of them see him specifically the same way, with straight black hair and a ruffled white shirt. He's often seen on the stoop of the cottage, in the cottage, and people staying have actually woken up to a specter matching his description in their room.
Oh, well, that's a little invasive. I don't love that.
It's his house. In the mailroom of the old post office, once again before it was moved, a man that was working to repaint the room and restore it to its regular and old school glory had put a lamp in the room that he was painting. He said he saw a shadow in the corner, and when he would be facing away and doing his job, he heard the lamp crash several times, every single time that he went to look to make sure that it didn't fall down because there was still light. It was always still standing. At the medical officer's residence, a lot of people hear child laughter, moaning, and footsteps to the commandant's building. Remember I said it was the first building that was actually built? There is a rocking chair inside. Guess what it does?
Does it rock?
Yes, it's actually called the nanny's rocking chair. People are allowed to sit in it. The people that sit in it feel an unnatural aura, and a lot of times, even if you're just taking photos of it, they feel like the equipment malfunctions. So cameras will turn off or the screen will go fuzzy when they go to review it later. Charles O'Hara Booth will stand in his bedroom window. Oftentimes it looks like he's weeping and looking over the settlement. This is where it gets a little bit sad, because also at the commandant's house, there's an unfortunate possible experience. Supposedly in the commandant's house, a little girl had fell down the stairs. People see her laying at the bottom of the stairs, quote, laying in a pool of blood. Her right arm is always seen to be as broken, and she looks really scared. People have said that when they do see her or when they're in that area, that they feel as though the right arm on their person is also injured. A lot of times they'll see her holding her twisted arm at the base of the stairs as well.
What happened to you?
She fell.
That's
it. That's all I got on her. In other cottages on the island, people have seen curtains open up with a small ghostly girl peering out. The pictures that are seen from this, it doesn't seem to be as though they're retouched, but the pictures that they see of this specific one, and this is something that you can easily find on the Haunted Australia Facebook page, as well as a number of other photos from this area, is that when you zoom in on the photo, you can actually see features like an eye, even to a level where you can see her nostrils, where it is very clearly what looks like a human face. They also have pictures of a little boy, quote, lurking in some of these photos. One of the most famous pictures from this are 3 ghost children standing in windows in one of the cottages, in photos that were taken about 10 seconds apart of the same cottage. The curtains were drawn back, and it looked as though there's one small boy standing in the left of the windows, and then 2 small children standing in another one. In the same house, they've seen a figure of a little boy in one, and some people see a wolf or a dog in the other one.
Weird.
They'll see in the right-hand window a lady holding a baby while a man stands beside her. In the medical office, sometimes there's rattling windows, furniture moves while people are in the room alone, and possibly a residual haunting of footsteps moving as though it's there. On one of the tours, one of the guests had said to the tour guide that they had to go to the restroom. And the tour guide had basically told him that they were on a schedule and they couldn't stop to wait. But he would tell